Good morning, everybody. I would like to call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order here at about 10:04. Purpose of this meeting being the budget review process. And I'd like to open up the floor for any discussion or any comments before we get underway. All right, hearing none. I'd like to welcome our County Executive Matt Ossenfort and our County Treasurer Sean Bowerman here today. Thank you guys for being here. And I'd actually really like to start off the meeting by turning the floor over momentarily to our County Executive so that he can give us a brief overview. You've all had a chance to get a look at the budget electronically since Thursday when it was sent out. I know, some of the basic parameters of it you're aware of already. But I'd like to, just open the floor up to our County Executive, Matthew, and have him give us a brief overview. I mean, I have a plan in mind myself as to where to go from there as a legislature, but certainly want to hear input from our County Executive, Matt Ossenfort, regarding the 2018 budget before we get underway. Matt?
Sure. Thank you. And I would say, first thank Sean for kind of putting up with the process of adding things and taking things out and working to an area where we're comfortable. But I think you're going to find that this is a pretty straightforward budget. There's not a whole lot of big changes in here. And for the purposes of this meeting today and talking with Legislator Peck, this is going to be a chance to kind of digest the budget from a broader sense and then work through details over the next couple of weeks. So what I did here is you'll see just a brief memo that talks about some of the, the big items that you're familiar with, the total amount of the budget and the tax levy increase and things of that nature. But, as it's been in the previous years, the goal is first and foremost to stay underneath the tax cap, which we did. We talked about it, you'll go back 10, 15 years, you see, really big increases and big decreases, and it was kind of a roller coaster related to the tax levy increases or decreases. So we wanted to keep that stable, which we continue to do this year, while keeping the services intact, which there isn't any cuts in here that would jeopardize any services, but also try to make investments in infrastructure and technology where we can. So I think the budget does that from a broad sense, and just to help in this process, two other sheets you'll see here. I asked Sean to put together a spreadsheet that indicates any of the big changes, and that's the one-pager. And that is any of the items that you see a big fluctuation in from last year to this year. So I think that would be helpful, and you'll see it. Given it's a one-page. There's some big numbers in here, and some things we're going to have to talk a little bit more with the department heads about over the next couple of weeks about what to expect into the future. But I think that's a good guide as far as, okay, when we talk about expenses are going up more so than revenue, this will give you a little detail why, and then this longer sheet, which I suspect will be the topic of conversation as well, is all the cuts that I've made to the departmental budgets. So these are the things that they'll likely indicate that they may or may not need. Now, I will say with some of the bigger departments such as social services, IT, DPW, well, I'm sure you can hear an earful from DPW, but for the most part, I've sat down and talked with them about what things, if you had to prioritize your list of things that I've cut, what are the most important things? So, for example, would be in IT. You'll see we did restore their computer software line to $99,000, and we took a hit on the computer equipment. Well, we ended up taking a bigger hit on equipment and not software after discussions with Dan. So there's been a lot of work gone into what has been cut and what has not been cut in some of the bigger departments, and a lot of those conversations will be ongoing for the next couple of weeks. But so I thought this would be a good start for you guys to take a look at some of the bigger changes that really impact impact the budget, and then what was cut out of the department. So when they talk to you, you'll have an idea. And like I said, I really don't think there wasn't any really big sweeping changes in this budget. It's more so managing the expenses. We did take a conservative projection for sales tax as far as an increase goes. I think that's important. And you'll see, I think what about we increased it 500,000, which for the local share is about 300,000 to our budget. So, I think given where we are, I think that's a safe way to go. I think if we raise it more, it would certainly make our jobs a little easier, but I think having a more conservative estimate there is better. So, without blabbing, I thought this would be good information to start the discussion today, and then take it from there on how you'd like to proceed.
All right. Anybody want to, any question to Matt regarding what he just delivered? All right, hearing none, I certainly appreciate the supporting documentation Matt has provided us on the spot here. And I think some of it's going to come in handy as we go through this process as I have prescribed, being budget chair. I had to adopt some type of approach to this process here. And my approach was this. Probably about 3-4 weeks ago, I said to Sean, I'd like a report going into our meeting that shows, the changes in revenue and appropriations by department in numerical order, so that we can take a look at the big ones first, the items that are impacting the budget to the greatest degree in a net fashion, and whether that be a positive net or a negative net. And so I believe what Matt has provided us here today, I took the time yesterday to the first sheet I'm going to concentrate on. Yours doesn't look like this. Yours looks like this. But this is a piece of paper here that we are going to be working off as we proceed through this budget. And so I direct your attention to that first and foremost. And we can use Matt's documentation that he gave us today as supporting documentation to help understand the changes in each department, and with obviously some verbal input from both Matt and Sean in that regard. So if you look at your sheet that says budget comparison, what I did is I went in and I ranked the top 5 departments where the greatest net value over in the right-hand side is impacting our budget. Okay, and I ranked them in dollar magnitude. So, and I think we all had a notion that some of these would certainly be the case that we'd be talking and spending most time on as we go through this. And keep this in mind, that when you look at the bottom of that page, if you go to the bottom of that second page and you see that the net change over in the far right-hand column is $606,456. Keep in mind that on a $111 million budget last year, that's going to go up to $113 million this year. That represents a 0.5% change. So, obviously, some of these components, keep in mind that a $1,000,001 is 1% change, so we have a net effect here of a 0.5% change in all of these categories on an aggregate basis. Okay, now obviously some of them are contributing to it more than others, and that's the detail we're going to get into. Yes, Martin?
On the second page, the column 3 and 4, is that supposed to be 18?
It is, and that's a typo, by the way. I know, I picked that up, I have it highlighted. Thank you for seeing that. Starting with Department 21 down to 32, it says, you see the middle two columns, it says 2017, it should be 2018, okay? So keep that in mind. Thank you, Martin, for bringing that up. I failed to do so.
The third column.
3 and 4.
Yeah, 3 and 4, yep. All right, so keeping in mind using this as a blueprint to begin our discussion, and ranking these departments insofar as I'm going to start off with the largest net increases, and to try to get to the bottom of the reason for them. I did a little exploring within the budget itself yesterday in comparing this comparison sheet to that, and have come to some conclusions on my own, but certainly want to open up the floor for discussion on them. So the top 5, and I will go in descending dollar order here, the greatest impact, if you look at personnel, which is Department 10, and you can see that the department itself up $620,000, and the benefits related to that up $166,000. So on a combined basis, essentially that's the personnel line item here. That's a total of $786,369 between those two components within the personnel budget. Now, from what I can see, within the budget itself, and it's probably going to help you as well as we talk about each of these departments, to go into your bound budgets and open up the page, for that, so that we can, go from this synoptic sheet over to this more detailed sheet. So, keeping in mind that personnel is Department 10. Now, if you look in the halfway or 3/4 of the way down the page on that budget, you will see that the adopted. No, it's okay. The adopted budget for 17 was $380,000, or $381, and the proposed executive budget is $735,000 within that budget, or within the personnel costs for the personnel department. And so that's a difference of about $355,000. Now, if you look above in the 1430 line item, 1430.00.1125, other compensation raise, you can see that $285,000 of this is the amount of money that we have budgeted, or the treasurer has budgeted for the settlement of the CESCA contract. So, that leaves roughly about $70,000, of a difference as to, where that might be coming from. And what I identified in that process was a line item 1430.4439, other service fees, wasn't around in 16 or 17, and there's a $73,000 allotment there. So, I mean, this was the point in time that I was going to turn to these gentlemen and say, can you give us some insight into that? Now, I know it's probably on his sheet here that he just gave you, under personnel, but I'd like to go into the dialogue part of this. Can either of you guys give us an idea what that $73,000 is?
Absolutely. That is, so just to give you a little background, so most of our functions at the county from an IT perspective are on the AS400. Sean does all this accounting, we do payroll, we do things like that. This is not a system that's going to be our long-term IT base. So what we're trying to do is to gravitate more towards cloud-based solutions. So this $73,000 is I believe it's about $6,000 a month for this ADP services, which essentially is a cloud-based payroll service, which will dramatically improve our efficiency and work related to payroll services, which one of the big issues that we've been trying to tackle, going back to when we first got here, was we've had one person who does payroll and that person's not here, all heck breaks loose, and I think part of that's because of the place. So they've been working on this for well over a year now to gravitate towards this new platform, and that's why you see that charge there.
Okay. Any questions for Matt on that?
Shouldn't that go into IT budget though?
No, because it's, I mean, I guess it could, but it's operated and managed through the personnel office.
So it's for that equipment, it's software.
It's more so software. There is some equipment with time clocks. We've got some time clocks, old time clocks out with fingerprint scanner, and working through getting going live on that. It should take a few more weeks. Yeah, it's, I feel comfortable with it in personnel. Most of payroll has switched to personnel, although it is a function that involves multiple departments. Yeah, and you'll see, yeah, in that, you know, the big changes in that personnel budget was, you know, a potential settlement for CSEA, that $73,000, workers' compensation.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that, Matt. And my next, everybody's okay with this explanation?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we go, within the personnel budget here as well, fringe benefits are up about $426,000. You can see the adopted budget last year, $9,730,000, and this year, $10,157,000. Now, obviously, we know that you know, you have to budget for the fringe benefits that apply to the increase in the CSEA contracts, but looking for some further insight into why, you know, that's up about $4.25.
Yeah, well, Sean could speak to this as well, but you know, the claims reviews for this year and looking at, you know, without giving too much specifics, we've had a number of more cases that hit our stop loss this year than in many of the years past, probably in the last 2 or 3 years combined. I think we had 6 or 7 different individuals hit the stop loss, which is $200,000. So that increase is related to what the experience we're seeing as self-insured. Anything else other than that?
And since we have switched third-party administrators for workers' comp, they have done, I would say, a more complete analysis of our outstanding claims. And that's why you're seeing a pretty large jump in the workers' comp line, because they have aggressively gone out and closed some additional cases that really should have been closed a while.
Yeah, it's a couple $100,000 right there of that.
So that's why you're seeing the big jump on the workers' comp, because our new TPA, third-party administrator, is being a lot more aggressive in trying to close out some of these workers' comp claims and saving the county in the long run.
So is that something that is may not apply to a future year because we're in a settlement year on some of these things?
Correct.
Okay. So not an anomaly, but something that's taken into account, a backup of workers' compensation, sorry, that we need to deal with in this upcoming year.
And a lot of that hinges on the severity and number of new claims in the year, new workers' comp claims.
Okay.
If the county realizes a good year where there's not a lot of workers' comp claims, then you would see that number level out or potentially decrease. But it all hinges on number and severity of workers' comp claims that drive that one.
Legislator Isabel?
I'm just catching up to the ADP switch. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Past that.
No.
Right now, we do all of our processing in-house with the pay as we're on.
Correct.
ADP, this is fees every year that are gonna reoccur, or is this a one-time charge to get over to ADP, or what is this?
That's an annual cost for the service.
So our costs are gonna go up to process payroll, 270,000, roughly a year now.
Correct.
To go to ADP. What is the advantage of it, of this happening?
In the past, we had a designated employee that did, so you were paying a salary and benefits along with some residual expenses.
Once it's fully implemented, it'll save on the amount of staff time needed to process payroll. It's more of it's the back, because the challenge in the personnel department is with the 4 different contracts, with multiple contracts, it's also, the goal is also to eliminate errors. Right now, the AS400, every single employee's information has to be programmed individually, and it has to. It's just a very. It's not the best process. So we're trying to improve as far as how much time it takes to input the information, have more things stored through the cloud, and have things spit out automatically rather than everything having to be individually
So
programmed.
basically, you'll be going from an in-house processing of your payroll to a source, is that what's happening?
Yes, pretty much around.
Essentially, what it is. And I think the goal is over the long term is to try to start migrating things off one by one off of the AS400. So when it is time to potentially maybe go away from the AS400, it's not as heavy of a lift at that point because some of the processes have already been taken.
So do you eliminate a payroll person to do this?
If you, like I said, yes, in the budget, well, in the 17 budget, there was a payroll coordinator position in the treasurer's office. That has been eliminated.
That person is gone.
And the personnel has taken over the day-to-day of that payroll. So they have been, doing it without that payroll person there already, even with the system not fully up and running. But once it's up and running, it'll certainly save a lot of time and energy in the office.
Legislator Patucci.
So just for clarity again, I think this is really good, convoluted. How much is the cost of the ADP annually?
70,000.
70,000. I thought I heard 270,000.
No.
70.
Actually, it's 73,000.
Okay, so 73,000. We did away with a position in the treasurer's office last year, but transferred it to the personnel office.
Not the position, the
The individual that was in that position filled another position.
yeah.
So the duties, last year, we had some savings because we didn't have the position.
Yeah.
We didn't add a new position in
Correct.
personnel, we just transferred it. And so where will the financial savings come in with use of the ADP? Will there be further cuts in personnel department, or are you counting on that the position that we did away with in the treasurer's last year is
Well,
counting for that?
There's an additional cut. I mean, I will say personnel, it's technically in my office, but you'll see in the budget this year, eliminated the labor management position, which is essentially, it's in my budget, but it's really personnel work. That is more work that the personnel office is going to absorb without having that position. So as far as further cuts, I don't see that, especially with the labor management position being taken away. But I will say, if we decide not to do ADP, it's not like that $73,000 is going to be able to be taken away, because if we don't do ADP, we have significant upgrades that need to happen to our current MM equipment, the time clocks and things of that nature. So if this isn't a situation where if we don't do this, then it goes to zero. If we don't do ADP, then we still have to make some investments in our time clocks and things of that nature, because I guess they're approaching the obsolete stage from what I gather. So it's going to be a cost for us no matter what, but we think this is the best path forward at this time, and we're still working through the process. So, and I'm sure Nicole could talk to us about it in much greater detail than I could as well.
Legislator Kelly.
Really doesn't have much to do with the budget, but it sparked my interest. We're planning on getting away from the AS400. And you want to do a cloud-based with ADP. thinking into the future, what other programs are we looking at? Is the ADP product that we're looking at getting going to be compatible with what we're, I don't want to throw money at this and then, 2 years down the road when we're getting away from.
Well, at this point, like I said, because to be honest with you, migrating totally away from the BS400 is a very long-term process. This ADP solution, there will be a bridge program that will tie into the AS400
So
now.
there is compatibility.
Yes.
And you've seen the same thing in, and don't laugh because this is serious, with the Dude Solutions in DPW, where it's this new cloud-based software package that allows a much more efficient input of information, similar to what we're doing here, where employees can check in on an iPad and things of that nature. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's just little pieces to get off the AS400.
But it all has to be compatible. with
Yeah,
what
and so
we're
far so good.
All right, any other questions there? All right, so we got some good explanation here as to some of the major changes that are affecting our cost center number 12 personnel, or number 10 personnel.
I do have one more.
Yes.
Budget. So, for the professional services, in 2016, we budgeted $80,000. Last year was $85,000. Why is there a $30,000 jump in that? Did contracts go up, or are we actually spending that amount, or?
I believe there was a number of, part of the reason was a number of labor attorney issues related to the sheriff's office that had to be paid. And that's mostly contractual, we can get you those contracts, but other than I think some increased attorney fees, I think that's about it. We can get you more detail on that. So that was what I actually looked to cut, and it was told abruptly that I can't. So we usually back up on that. Right, and remember we had a conversation about, you said professional services, and I said we got to talk to them about it. And yeah.
Is that Legislator Kelly?
It's a big increase, I'm just.
Legislator DeChessie?
Yeah, before we get too far along, I just want to develop a little better understanding of one thing here. Because I really like this approach in the summary sheet of the net changes. And of course, just looking at the total net changes, you could almost make the case that personnel is responsible in terms of net changes for almost the entire amount that we're increasing spending by. My problem goes to on this sheet, the budget comparison. Appropriated fund balance is really being treated like it's a line item expenditure. So we're indicating here that there's a $77,000 net increase in the amount that we're using. But what?
Actually, it's a reduction.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was looking at the right-hand column.
Yeah, synoptically on the bottom there.
I see the parentheses.
Yeah.
It doesn't change my point, though, that what we're doing now is structurally, we're building into our budgets the appropriated fund balance of roughly 3.8 or $3.9 million. And we're viewing that in terms of the changes. So I think the question we ought to be asking ourselves is that money always going to be available to us to be, which I know the answer is not necessarily. Well, so I think the context that we have to view the budget has to take into account that we cannot just structurally assume that there's going to be almost $4 million in fund balance available to us on a regular basis to draw from. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, about the fund balance.
Yeah, in discussions that we had going into this budget, and I think you can see with the amount that we cut out of what the departments requested, is we need to pull back as much as possible this year with knowing that, okay, like you said, we're going to be okay for the next couple of years, but what happens in year 3, year 4, if we don't see any increase in sales tax? I mean, I think we could have probably bumped up sales tax another $500,000 or maybe even a little bit more and reduced that number. But I think it was something that we certainly were mindful of as we crafted this in trying to pull it back as much as possible. And we felt that this 3.8 at this point, unless we really wanted to significantly impact services, this was the sweet spot, so to speak, as far as the use of fund balance for this year. I wish it was 2.8 or even less, but if we want to cut another $1 million out of this budget, we're really going to have to talk about services, which I think is going to be, hopefully we don't get to that point 2-3 years down the road, we start seeing revenues come back a little bit. But, you know, I think we tried to hold the line as much as possible, given what you're talking, given the issue that you're talking about. We wholeheartedly agree. It's, you know, we'll be okay this year, next year, but 3-4 years out, I think is, if sales tax doesn't come back stronger, we, you know, or maybe we don't have, you know, depending on some of these things that are just, you know, your medical, your workers' comp, these big costs that we're talking about, you know, we felt that this was the sweet spot for this year. But it was all of these decisions and some of the, you know, there's a number of personnel cuts in the budget this year that I know departments are going to come in here and tell you that they absolutely need them, but they were made with the issue of the fund balance in mind that, you know what, we have to start chipping away at this in order to, you know, to put ourselves in a tougher position 2, 3, 4 years down the road, depending on, you know, the broader, you know, financial climate.
So the takeaway is, since there is at least a decrease this year in the amount that we're taking, is that we could trend in that direction.
Exactly.
That would be.
I mean, to me, I interpreted that as a positive sign, that we're going to invade it to a less of a degree than we did last year, albeit minuscule, you know, $77,000. But I mean, we all have to face the fact that that's the white elephant in the room. I mean, I know we're dissecting, we're doing an operation here on departments, and you've offered us a 1,000-foot view that I was hoping to get down to once we went through the dissolution of all of the departments. But the reality is, you know, as currently structured, there is no way to balance this budget without invading fund balance and being taxpayer money that has already been paid. Certainly something, you know, is there and should be used to help us, I would say, to a certain degree, balance budgets. But what we have to be mindful of is the dollar degree, as you brought up, to which we do it. But you know, obviously, when we look at our budget, I mean, we have real estate taxes, sales taxes, and federal and state reimbursement for services. Those are our 4 main line items of revenue. And we know we're going to get what we're going to get from the state and the Fed to administer their programs every year. And it's never enough to do exactly what we have to do. So then the 2 bogeys really are real estate taxes and sales taxes. And how do we increase them to try and offset invading, you know, the fund balance to help us balance the budget? That's you know, the the multi-million-dollar question.
Yeah, I understand, because, you know, I've always viewed excess fund balance as excess taxation, and I agree with that point. I think the point I'm just trying to make is that there's great danger in just structurally building this into a budget year after year.
There's no question about that, Legislator DeChessie, and I think all of us would agree with you in that regard. You know, we don't want this pile of money to evaporate, and then all of a sudden, you know, we're in a situation 3-4 years down the road where we have to invoke a large tax increase to replenish it. You know, I guess, you know, all our executive and treasurer can do with our help is to try and find, you know, new sources of revenue. But I mean, you can see certain things as they develop, like the Dollar General, for instance, okay? A great project, and certainly great for our county and great for employment, but obviously, you know, I think the first year's pilot payment on is going to be $750,000, correct? Something of that nature, Sean, somewhere in that, you know. So here's an example of progress that's going to add revenue to one of the line items that we have an ability to add revenue to, but it's going to affect revenue less than 1%. You know, so the first year that we realized the income off of that, you know, so it's a struggle.
And I'd add just another structural issue that none of us are ever going to do anything about, but what we're dealing with is that we have, and I would argue, is a somewhat generous sales tax distribution contract, which is a 30-year contract that we're locked into for longer than any of us will be here for. So even a $500,000 increase for sales tax for the county is really only about a $300,000 increase because of that distribution. So, you know, even one of our biggest sources of revenue, you know, still has some strings attached to it. But, you know, I do think, you know, one of the other things that was certainly in my mind, I don't want to speak for Sean as we put this budget together, is there are some good signs out there. Certainly nothing that would indicate we're out of the woods, but, you know, I think the economic activity in the county is certainly on the up. You're seeing, you know, the real estate market is doing better. I'm sure Bob could speak to that a little bit. Our sales tax, as we discussed, is up, which is not that way in a lot of other counties. So there are some encouraging things. So that's why, you know, rather than go in and say, okay, all right, we're at 3.8, Sean, we need to do another $1.5 million. You know, given those things, you know, yeah, 3.8, give it another year to see where we are. That was sort of my mindset in putting this together and arriving at the numbers that we arrived at. I think realistically, maybe we could shave off another 50 or 500,000, 750,000 without really jeopardizing services. But I think, you know, there'll be some things that we take a step back, like the computer software, which is a bit of an increase in Data's budget is at about $100,000 this year. That's something that will get finally, after doing this year after year for 3-4 years, we'll get all our computers up to, I think it's Windows 2010 or whatever we need to be at, and we're no longer a couple generations behind. But could we live without that? Yeah. Would it be a pain? Yeah. But, you know, so I think it really, you know, from where we go from here is a you know, where the discussion that we need to have.
You know, and just another point to add on to that, you know, you look at what was budgeted last year, $3,897,000 from the fund balance. Now, we all know by going over that dashboard that through the month of July, sales tax was tracking $600,000 above budget. And, you know, if it continued on that pace, could grow as much as $1 million year, you know, greater than what was budgeted. So when our financial statement is finally completed next March, you know, although we budgeted $3.897 million, it may end up being, you know, only $3 million that we used because of it. You know,
Well, I
so
know how it works. I'm just wanting to make a point.
no,
Yeah, we're starting to just.
no, there's no question. There's no question. I mean, we all walked into this situation, all of us. You know, the first legislature 3 years ago, and now this legislature. I mean, there's just right now there's no way to balance this budget without using fund balance. You know, so but we have to be mindful of that, and it's a very good point, and we need to, you know, I think we're starting off with a decent trend here in at least the budgeting less from the fund balance, as you pointed out. So
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to do was distinguish the difference between using any amount of fund balance this year and then making the assumption that that fund balance is always going to be available to draw from like that. That's all.
no, you're absolutely right, Legislator Duchesne. All right, going down the budget comparison sheet, the next department I'd like to get into is the sheriff jail. That is represented the second largest positive or net increase at $413,590. Now, so if you could please turn to Department 15 in your booklets here, the sheriff's budget, that would be page 16? 15. Okay. Just for comparison purposes. All right, so if you look at your spreadsheet, you can see that revenues last year at $902,366, this year at $658,288. That's down $244,000. If you look in the revenue column, you know one of them that was topical to us a few months ago, the foreign prisoner line item. You can see that the request was 100,000. Last year was budgeted for 300,000. Now down to 175. So 125,000 of reduction in revenue from one budget year over the other is in the foreign prisoners. And that leaves about $119,000, of which I was looking for a little insight from the gentleman here.
All right, when we're talking the sheriff's revenue, like you said, the board for prisoners, like I said, if you look at the budget, the sheriff really only requested a revenue of 100,000.
Yes, he did.
Looking at where he currently is at about 95 to 100,000 through the end of August. We had a little discussion and we don't feel it's out of the realm for him to be able to reach that 175,000 next year. If he's willing to make a phone call. And the other piece of revenue that you see a large hit to, in 17, the state offered a one-year grant for 911 operations. And that was $147,000.
That was going to be my next question. What is that?
That was a 911 grant that was received for 911 operations, but it was only a 1 year.
Okay.
So that goes away. So those are the two big ticket items
That are contributing to the year-over-year reduction in revenue.
Like I said, we may be in a case where this you had a discussion with the sheriff here. He may not be willing to go out and pursue outside. So he may be less than that 100 that he's asking.
Well, just to add to that a little, so I had a discussion with the sheriff about his budget prior to having an expectation of potentially a CSCA settlement, but I asked him, I said, we're going to do the dance again. I said, do you think you could do 150 this year? And his response was, I think we should get to 150, no problem. 175 maybe, but we think he can get to 175. So,
All right.
and then the other big thing that is more so an issue this year is, it happened in Fulton County. We're looking at the cost of jail medical services to potentially double.
He's jumping on the extra side now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, because that's where I was headed. The appropriations are up about $170,000.
That was
So
a big one. There was a large settlement related to these types of services that I guess happened in Nassau County. It's really affected insuring these companies that provide medical services at jails. We've seen premiums double. This is going to be RFP very shortly, but in talking with our current vendor, essentially with the liability insurance cost increases, we could see that potentially double. So that's why.
can you just point out the line where we're looking in the budget?
We're on page 19 under line 3150, 4431. Professional services.
Okay, down towards the bottom. Okay, yep.
It was 107 budgeted for 17.
And it's up to 2.25. Okay.
And that is
Page 19, Bobby.
19 at the bottom, 3150.
Second line up from the bottom, professional services.
Thank you.
Yep.
There's not a solid number that we, RFP got the bids and done that, but we're expecting a large increase. So rather than, rather than be caught without the money in the line, we estimated that would be the cost.
And that is, of the increase in appropriations of about 170, that's, about 117 of it. So that's the lion's share of it.
Yeah, you can see the sheriff's budget, he asked for 3 cars. We took, and all the fixings, we left 2 cars in the budget. And he asked for a van, took the van out. We can address that potentially with our equipment buy next year, like we did this year. So, other than that, those are the big changes.
Yes, Legislator Kelly.
going down memory lane. First year here, we got 3 vehicles? Was it 4?
Off the top of my head.
We'll just go with
Yes.
3.
I will often joke we go through these cars like 3 times.
Well, and I understand there are a lot of miles and everything put on. But this was something that I said last year. There are 3 zones. There are 3 cars out and possibly 2 backup. So that's 5 cars. In the past 3 years that we've been here, we bought 3. Then didn't we buy another 3? It may have been 2.
3, I believe we purchased 2 last year. I think there was 2 in the budget last year. 3, like you said, 3, 2, this will be another 2.
Well, we bought 3 the first year we were here too. Every year we bought a new vehicle, so
Correct.
we're getting to a point where there aren't enough deputies to drive all these.
I would encourage you to talk to the sheriff about that and,
Are we accumulating them, or are we trading the ones bought 5 years ago for these?
likely the response is going to be, and he can give you a list of the cars with the miles. We do put an absurd amount of miles on the vehicles, but related to the details, which is why I would argue we need the Western County Sheriff's Post as part of our emergency plan, but,
I understand that they put on a lot of miles on these cars. We have services in-house to maintain, I would assume, and as long as these newer vehicles are well maintained, they should last on high mileage for at least 3 years.
my understanding he does use them until they have about 250, 300,000 miles on it, but anything further than that, I would say it'd be a topic.
And that's what happened to my Neon, just so everyone knows. I don't maintain it.
Legislator Patel?
Thank you for that mechanical explanation. I thought last year during this process, we said we're tired of discussing this, and we're tired of 1 year not getting any cars, and another year buying 3 cars or 4 cars. And I thought we put into place that we were going to plan on replacing 2 cars a year, and we were going to really work at keeping that, so we maintained the fleet. I'm in total agreement with the 2 cars, and I don't like to spend money, but I'm confident that we should stay with that plan of replacing 2 cars a year, so we're not always playing catch-up.
Agreed, but if they're not servicing them or using our in-house people till 200,000.
Well, you know, I would say this. We just voted in a whole new automotive process. So hopefully we can dovetail that with these cars and keep them.
Well, I will
You know.
say that I think that, it's just like whether it's your computer software or your cars or your equipment at DPW, what we've been trying to do since 14 is get up to the point where it's just maintenance. And then you have your regular, like you were talking about, your regularly scheduled maintenance. You can't just go a couple of years without it because then you're playing catch up again. I think, the two is probably a fair number to expect every year. But I think, without having the cars and the mileage and the years in front of me, I think, there's really a question of time to share about. But I think, the goal is, like Bob said, I would agree, it's just getting to the point where we're not saying, oh, we need 4 this year, we need,
Keeping a steady flow. Yes, Legislator.
because then,
So the equipment that's in the vehicles that we will be replacing, is that still
Good.
usable? So do we have to buy all the new computer equipment that goes into these
he
new cars?
does include the funding in the budget for the new computer equipment. I'm not sure what happens to the old stuff. I know he does auction some of it off, but I would let the sheriff speak on that.
And by the way, this process obviously will give us a good idea as to who we want to invite back here for, some sessions on the 25th or 26th, which Chairman Diamond will get into a little bit later. So, all right, any other questions on the sheriff's budget? Hearing none, we'll move to the third largest positive delta here,